This story is titled, While I was away on a business trip, my parents rented out my room to a stranger and started collecting money. Then, when I returned, they gave me an ultimatum, pay rent or get out. This was too much to bear, so I packed my bags and never returned. Hey Reddit! I'm a 31-year-old guy serving in the Navy. Over the past 9 years, I've been deployed overseas multiple times, but through it all, my childhood home has remained my permanent address. It's not just a house to me, it's where I grew up and where all my memories are. My dad died when I was 22. I did everything possible to help my mom keep the house after his passing. I poured my military death benefit and most of my savings from my early service years into making sure we wouldn't lose our family home. In exchange, we made a formal agreement. She would stay in the house, I would co-own 40% of it, and no matter what happened, my old bedroom would always remain mine. I insisted on getting this agreement in writing. Even back then, I knew how things could go. My mom had a habit of letting people crash at our place, extended family, friends of friends, and sometimes even people I'd never met before. But the house meant something special to me. It was the only constant in my life during deployments, and my room was supposed to be the one space that didn't change. I needed a place to return to, a place that stayed the same when everything else in my life was in constant flux. That promise didn't last long. During my third deployment, I came home on brief leave only to find my cousin living in my room. All my clothes, books, and medals had been boxed up and shoved into the attic like I didn't even exist. When I confronted my mom about it, she just shrugged and said, "You're barely here and family needs help." She hadn't even given me a heads up, let alone had an actual conversation about it. We argued, but I eventually let it go. I figured maybe it was a one-time thing, an emergency situation that wouldn't happen again. I was wrong. Over the next few years, it kept happening. Once it was my aunt's teenage son who needed a place to stay. Then, it was a friend's daughter going through rough times. Every time I came home, I had to reclaim my space. It started to feel like I was a guest in someone else's house rather than a co-owner of the property. I eventually offered to pay for her to convert the basement into a proper guest room so people would stop taking mine. She agreed, and I covered the cost, but she ended up using the money for something else entirely. After that disappointment, I never brought it up again. Last year, while stationed in Bahrain, I came home for a surprise visit and found my room completely transformed. The walls had been painted a different color, my bed was completely gone, and the shelves were packed with glitter and sewing machines. She had turned it into a full-on crafting room. My belongings were nowhere to be seen. That time, I didn't let it go. I told her clearly that she had to stop making these changes without telling me. She apologized, saying she just needed a space to be creative, and promised it wouldn't happen again. I reminded her calmly but firmly that I legally owned 40% of the house. I wasn't just visiting. She said she understood, and we left it at that. Before my most recent deployment, I specifically asked her again not to touch the room. I even went so far as to install a small motion-activated camera in there. I was completely transparent about it. I told her about the camera, and she said it was fine, and promised she wouldn't even go in there. I took her at her word. In November, my mom started dating someone new. His name was Greg, a man in his late 50s who used to own a few rental properties. From what I could tell, he was the type who liked to act like the smartest person in the room. I only met him once when I came home for a long weekend. He was polite enough on the surface, but something about him felt off. He kept hinting that I should think about moving on, saying that hanging on to a childhood room was immature, and that men my age should be looking into their own real estate instead of clinging to the past. I didn't say much in response. I just watched and observed. A few days ago, I got on a scheduled call with my younger sister, who's currently a college student. She's not exactly close with Mom, but she still visits during breaks. I'd asked her to stop by the house and check in while I was away. That's when she dropped the bombshell. Greg wasn't just staying over anymore. He'd moved in. And not only that, my mom had sold off a portion of the backyard to him. The paperwork was done, signed, and sealed. Greg now owned part of the land. There was no warning, no conversation, nothing. That was the moment everything shifted. I asked for more details, and my sister told me it wasn't just the land. Mom had also cleared out my room again. The camera was gone, the door had been repainted, and new locks had been installed. When my sister asked Mom why, her answer was simple. "That room's Greg's office now. He's doing renovations." I hung up that call and just sat there, not even feeling anger, just a cold focus. I pulled out the scanned documents I'd kept over the years. The co-ownership agreement, the financial records, everything. I'd let things slide too many times before, but selling part of the house, our house, to some guy she just started dating wasn't just inconsiderate. It was illegal. And I had a feeling that wasn't even the worst of it. The moment I ended the call with my sister, I went straight to checking the county records online. The property registry showed a new deed amendment dated just 3 weeks ago. It listed a parcel of land about a quarter-acre from our backyard as having been sold to Greg. The lot was carved from the side yard that wrapped behind the house. It had once been my dad's garden area. My name wasn't on the updated deed filing at all. There was a signature next to my mom's that was supposed to be mine, but it wasn't. I stared at it for a while, noticing how the signature was a mess. Wrong style, uneven strokes, not even close to how I sign legal papers. It wasn't digital either, so whoever signed it had to actually put pen to paper. I downloaded a copy and sent it to the real estate attorney I'd worked with after Dad passed. She emailed me back within the hour, immediately flagging it as suspicious. She told me she'd seen forged co-owner signings before and advised me to gather as much documentation as possible while she contacted a fraud investigator she trusted. I called my mom next. It was past midnight for her, but she picked up on the third ring, sounding half asleep, or maybe pretending to be. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I asked about the land transfer, and she seemed surprised I'd found out so quickly. She admitted Greg now owned part of the land, and that they had filed the documents at the county clerk's office last month. She described it like it was no big deal, just a backyard segment no one was using. Then she said something that made everything worse. Greg was thinking about building a small unit on the back lot, and in the meantime, he might use my room as his temporary workspace. She said it casually, like it was just an errand she'd forgotten to mention. I told her straight. She couldn't sell any part of the property without my signature. We were both on the title. It was in writing. It was in the public registry. She brushed it off, saying something about how I'm overseas most of the time, how it wasn't hurting anything, and that she thought I'd understand since I had a life now, that it was just paperwork. I didn't argue further. I logged off the call and messaged my sister again. She was already asleep, but had left me a long voice note. She'd stayed over that weekend and noticed Greg bringing in tools, boxes, even some drywall. He'd been working in the garage and moving things in and out of the backyard. No permits were posted anywhere. She also mentioned that some of my things, my old dresser, the shelf with frame certificates, a few boxes, were missing. When she asked Mom about them, she said they'd either been donated or thrown out to make space. The next morning, my sister sent me a batch of pictures. My bedroom door now had a digital lock on it with a private office sign taped under the handle. Inside, the walls had been stripped, the closet emptied, and there were wires hanging from the ceiling. The backyard had flag markers and chalk outlines, likely to prep for a new foundation. My dad's garden bench had been taken apart, with pieces scattered in the dirt. I saved everything, the photos, the emails, the deed scan, the voice notes, and forwarded it all to my lawyer. She scheduled an in-person meeting with a notary specialist and a fraud investigator for when I return in 2 weeks. In the meantime, she told me to prepare a sworn statement and start a legal log of everything I remembered about the house agreement, payments, and what I'd contributed. I already had the receipts, bank transfers, written contracts from when the co-ownership was finalized, and even emails between me and my mom from those early years discussing the exact terms of what my share included: land, room, and legal stake. I called my mom again later that day. This time I made it a video call and recorded it with my lawyer's approval. I laid it all out. The signature wasn't mine. The deed was illegal without dual consent. She had no authority to sell anything without my involvement, and Greg had no right to be modifying anything on the property. I told her the changes had to stop immediately, or I would take legal action. She tried to keep her tone light at first, saying I was being dramatic, that she and Greg weren't hurting anyone, that I hadn't even been home for more than a few weeks each year. Then she started pushing guilt, how she'd had to manage everything since Dad died, and how I was treating her like a criminal when all she was trying to do was move forward. I didn't respond to that. I just repeated what I'd already said. Reverse the land transfer or deal with court proceedings. She hung up without another word. No follow-up text, no call back. Later that night, my sister texted again. She went by the house to check something and saw a moving truck parked outside. Greg was loading more things in, and some of it looked like the boxes I had stored in the attic. She tried to ask questions, but he told her to leave if she wasn't going to be helpful. She backed off but snapped a few more pictures. One of the boxes was labeled with my name and another had military gear I hadn't touched in years. I called a storage company near my hometown and paid to reserve a climate-controlled unit. I then wired my sister money to pick up any personal belongings she could get her hands on without confrontation. I told her not to argue with anyone, not to force anything, just retrieve what she could and bring it to the unit. We have a shared document now. Photos, lists, everything she collects. It's growing fast. If my mom thought she could erase me from the house, she picked the wrong battle. 2 days after the last call, my attorney sent out the formal demand letter. It went directly to my mother's address via registered mail, and another copy was emailed to both her and Greg using the addresses listed on the county property filings. The letter outlined everything: my legal stake, the forged signature, the unauthorized land transfer, and the illegal modifications being done without my consent. It demanded that all construction stop immediately and the deed be reversed within 15 business days. It also warned that further action would include a court-ordered partition and potential fraud charges. 12 hours after the letter arrived, my mother called me. Her voice was loud and panicked. She kept saying I was trying to destroy the family, that I was choosing money over blood. I didn't respond to any of it. She kept going until the line cut out. 5 minutes later, my sister texted me that Greg had used her phone to call me. She didn't answer. 10 minutes after that, my phone rang again. My mother's number, but Greg was the one speaking. He told me I was being selfish, that I was ungrateful for everything my mom had done. He claimed that I should be happy someone with his kind of experience was finally helping her keep the house running. He used to manage rental flips years ago and clearly thought that gave him the right to bulldoze boundaries, like it was just another project. He said I'd forfeited any right to the house the moment I walked away to play soldier. I waited for him to finish, then told him clearly that all communication going forward would be through my lawyer. I ended the call and blocked the number. I haven't spoken to either of them directly since. My sister kept me in the loop. She stopped by again later that week and said things were tense. Greg was pacing the yard, taking down marker flags and moving wood panels and tools out of the garage. A tarp that had been spread over a section of the backyard was gone. The next day, she overheard him arguing with my mom in the kitchen about who's going to pay for the mess now. Meanwhile, my mother started talking to the neighbors. She told the woman next door that I was trying to take the house away from her. She said I'd turned cold, that I was heartless, and that I was only interested in my inheritance. One of the neighbors, an old friend of my dad's, actually reached out to me through my military contact email to let me know what was being said. I forwarded that message to my attorney too. Then Greg made a move. A few days after the demand letter went out, he filed a written statement with the county clerk's office. In it, he claimed I had verbally forfeited my interest in the house years ago and hadn't contributed financially since 2020. He included a typed letter, unsigned and undated, supposedly from me, saying I didn't want to be involved with the property anymore. My lawyer requested copies through a records pull. The notary on file for the deed transfer, a woman Greg had worked with during his time managing rental properties, is now under review because the signature log she submitted doesn't match mine. Not even close. My lawyer filed an official complaint with the county clerk. She also filed a fraud alert with the Property Division Office, which halted any further transfer or construction activity until the matter is resolved. That same day, her office sent a cease and desist notice directly to Greg and another one to my mom. The notices were taped to the front gate of the house and the back fence near the construction zone. Greg's hired workers, who had started early digging for utility lines, left the site by the afternoon and didn't come back. Inside the house, things weren't any better. My sister checked my room again and took more photos. The old camera I installed had been removed from the top shelf, with cords dangling where it used to be. She found it in a kitchen drawer with the lens smashed. The room was full of clutter. Boxes of yarn, plastic drawers filled with Greg's drill bits and screws, a folding table stacked with blueprints and piles of receipts. He had drilled holes in the closet walls to install floating shelves and run extension cords through a hole he cut near the baseboard. My books were gone, and a large plastic bin labeled "Donate" was sitting next to a trash bag of what looked like my winter clothes. At that point, I sent a written statement to my mom through my lawyer. It said that I no longer trusted her with the property, the agreement, or my personal items. I included a request for her to vacate the co-ownership agreement if she refused to undo the land transfer. The letter was calm, legal, and final. She responded through email. The entire message was one sentence: "If that's how you want it, go ahead." My lawyer read it, archived it, and added it to our legal file. That weekend, my sister helped move everything she could find into the storage unit I'd rented. She took photos, cataloged every item, and sent me a digital log. Most of my original furniture was gone. A few framed pictures were still buried in a hallway closet. One of my dad's old watches that I'd kept in a locked drawer was missing. I filed a temporary emergency leave request through my command the following Monday. It was approved within 48 hours. I'll be flying back next month to review the damage, meet my attorney in person, and possibly begin the partition process. If my mother won't undo the sale, the next best option is to force a legal split of the property and sell my share. What she did was more than betrayal. It was an erasure, and I'm not going to let it stand. I landed back in the country on a red-eye flight and didn't even stop to rest. I drove straight from the airport to the house with my carry-on still in the back seat. The neighborhood looked the same, but the house didn't. The lawn was overgrown, and someone had painted the front door a deep red. There were two unfamiliar cars in the driveway, neither of which belonged to my mother. I walked up and unlocked the door with the same key I'd used for years. The key slid in fine, but the lock wouldn't turn. I tried again with the same result. Then I checked the lock itself, brand new. Greg had changed it. No warning, no notice. And since I'd been blocked on my mother's phone weeks ago, there was no way to ask what was going on. Luckily, my younger sister pulled up 10 minutes later. She had been staying with a friend nearby, avoiding the tension at home since the demand letter went out. She still had a copy of the old side door key, and it worked. We walked in through the laundry room, and I froze. The entire interior had changed. The walls had been repainted light gray. The old couch that had been in our living room since I was a teenager was gone, replaced with some glossy black sectional that didn't match anything. The family portraits were missing. My dad's military shadow box, which had been hanging above the fireplace, was gone. In its place was a large abstract canvas and a digital clock that didn't work. Boxes of tools were stacked near the hallway, with Greg's name on half of them, in marker. I went to my room next. What used to be my room? The door was open. The floor had been ripped up, no more carpet, just plywood covered in dust. The bed frame was gone, mattress too. My desk had been replaced with a metal workbench. My bookshelves were empty. A futon had been crammed into the corner with a pile of hardware catalogs stacked on top. Power cords ran from the closet into the hallway, taped down with blue painter's tape. He had drilled a hole through the closet door and mounted a surge protector directly into the drywall. I checked the closet and found half of it lined with plastic drawers and bins full of wires, clamps, and receipts. None of it was mine. My sister helped me search through the attic and hallway closet. My military awards, my personal journals, even the birth certificate copies I kept locked in a drawer were missing. A few old photo albums remained, but anything connected to my career or my financial records had vanished. I started taking pictures of everything, room by room, time stamped and backed up to cloud storage. An hour later, Greg pulled up in a black truck, got out, and started yelling before he even got through the gate. He said I was trespassing and accused me of breaking into his home. My sister pulled out her phone and began recording everything. I didn't say much. I walked outside, met him halfway, and showed him a printed copy of the original deed agreement and my ID. I pointed out my 40% ownership stake and told him plainly that I had every right to be on the property. He still called the police. 2 officers showed up. I gave them my documents, my ID, and even the emergency leave approval. I explained the entire situation, how my signature had been forged, how I was legally tied to the house, and that the matter was already under review by the county clerk. Greg was loud and angry, trying to talk over them. The officers pulled him aside and asked for his proof of ownership. He didn't have any. They told him he had no legal grounds to prevent me from entering the home and that until the property dispute was settled, I had equal rights to be there. They asked him to leave for the day to prevent escalation. He resisted, but in the end, they escorted him off the property. About 3 hours later, my mother came home. She was out of breath, clearly rushing over after Greg called her. She walked in and demanded to know why I hadn't warned her about flying back. She didn't ask what happened, didn't apologize, didn't even acknowledge what had been taken or changed. She looked around like she expected me to be gone already. I said nothing, just stood in the kitchen and watched her try to pretend everything was normal. The next day, I had a meeting scheduled with my attorney. I brought the forged deed, the photos from the property, and the printed emails from the notary office we'd investigated. It turned out that the woman who stamped the document wasn't registered with the state anymore. She'd been removed for licensing issues. She was also connected to Greg. She used to work for one of his old property ventures as a bookkeeper. My lawyer submitted all of it to the County Property Fraud Division. By the end of the week, the county clerk's office confirmed receipt of our complaint. A formal review was opened. The paperwork could now lead to criminal charges, depending on how the investigation went. In the meantime, I moved forward with the partition process. My lawyer filed a formal petition that same day. The partition means the house is now being treated like a shared asset in dispute. The court will determine how to divide it, either by buyout or forced sale. I requested a full audit of the property, including any land sold or modified. That includes the portion Greg tried to claim in the backyard. Once the judge signs off, it goes into public record. Greg can't make changes. My mother can't legally rent, renovate, or sell anything until the case is resolved. I've already packed what was left of my belongings. They're in storage now. I won't stay in the house again, but I'm not walking away from it either. The county surveyor arrived early in the morning with 2 assistants and a stack of paperwork. They spent 4 hours walking the yard, measuring everything, and marking boundaries with flags and stakes. One of them knocked on the door halfway through and handed me a printout showing the official property lines. That's when they pointed out a problem. At the very back of the lot, there was a poured concrete slab, neatly leveled, framed in, and clearly prepped for future construction. The surveyor asked if I had filed a permit for it. I hadn't. Greg had poured it without saying anything to the county or to me. The slab extended a few inches onto the setback boundary, which made it a violation even if it had been permitted. I filed a zoning violation report the same day. The county inspector came out within 48 hours, surprisingly fast, but my lawyer had flagged it as a potential zoning risk tied to an active property fraud case, which likely pushed it higher on their review list. He took pictures, reviewed the property lines again, and issued a formal citation for unauthorized construction. The fine was addressed to the property owners, both of us. The inspector also flagged the property in the system, which means no construction of any kind can move forward without a full legal review. When my mother was asked about it during the follow-up inspection, she claimed Greg must have misunderstood the rules and thought he was only laying the base for a patio. That excuse didn't last long. My sister was going through a drawer in the living room and found 3 delivery slips and 2 receipts. One of them was for concrete mix and rebar. It had a home address on the invoice and my mother's name as the person who signed for delivery. The date matched the day the slab was poured. The total was over $1,200. We brought those receipts to my lawyer. She then helped me access old bank statements from a joint maintenance account that my mother and I had used for house expenses. That account was only supposed to be touched for agreed-upon repairs. We found multiple withdrawals linked to building supply stores, tool rental companies, and even a local contractor. I never approved any of it. Those withdrawals started 4 months ago and totaled more than $9,000. We started building a separate reimbursement case for financial misuse of co-owned funds. The next morning, my mother tried a different approach. She showed up at the house early, alone, carrying a grocery bag with breakfast pastries and coffee. She placed it on the table and started crying. She said she never meant for things to get this far, that she was just trying to have a fresh start, that Greg had promised to help her build something real. She said I was trying to take it all away because I didn't want her to be happy again. She said I was jealous. I listened until she finished, then told her straight, if she wanted to build a new life, she should have done it somewhere else. Not in a house she co-owned with me, not with money I never agreed to use, not by giving away land that legally wasn't hers to sell. I reminded her that I had given her every chance to make this peaceful, and she and Greg had chosen to ignore every warning. My lawyer advised me to change the locks for the time being. As a co-owner, I had the right to secure the property if I issued written notice. I had new locks installed that afternoon and left a letter from my mother at the front door with her new set of keys. I made it clear that the house was no longer open to Greg and that any future access would be limited to co-owners only. She didn't respond. 3 days later, Greg tried to come back. He pulled up in the truck and walked straight to the front door with a duffel bag. He tried the handle. When it didn't open, he started knocking, then banging. I opened the door halfway and stood in the doorway. He started to argue. I didn't say much. I told him clearly that if he wanted to discuss anything, he could take it up with my attorney. He stood there for a few more seconds, then turned around and left. That night, I noticed water pooling near the laundry room wall in the basement. I followed the line and found a burst pipe near one of the corners Greg had been working on. He had rerouted part of the plumbing for what was supposed to be the guest unit. It hadn't been sealed properly, and the line cracked under pressure. I called for an emergency repair. The plumber came out, fixed the pipe, and told me it looked like an amateur job. Definitely not inspected work. The bill came out to just over $600. I paid it myself and added it to the running tally my lawyer was keeping. Between the concrete, the plumbing damage, the stolen funds, and the removal of my belongings, the reimbursement total was now over $11,000. My lawyer filed for a full accounting of all shared expenses dating back 3 years. That included every withdrawal, purchase, or renovation done under the shared maintenance account. She attached that request to the property partition paperwork and submitted it to the court clerk. The court gave us a hearing date 6 weeks from now. My lawyer told me this would be the key point in the case. I sent my mother a written message, delivered through legal channels, letting her know the date and her options. She could either work with us and divide the property peacefully, or she could keep fighting and let the court decide everything. For the first time in months, no one came knocking. Tension in the house reached a breaking point within days. My mother no longer spoke a word to me. No greetings, no eye contact, just slammed cabinet doors and muttering whenever she walked past. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was loaded with hostility. One morning, I walked into the kitchen and saw a heavy chain and padlock wrapped around the handles of the refrigerator. She had looped it through the side brackets and clicked it shut with a new padlock. A handwritten note taped to the fridge read, "Not your groceries, don't touch." That same day, I tried opening the hallway linen closet and found a small metal latch bolted to the top corner, locked. Same thing on the bathroom cabinet in the main hall. When I checked the mail tray we usually kept by the door, it was empty. My sister later told me she'd seen our mother moving mail into a drawer in the living room. A drawer now kept locked with a child-proof latch she'd repurposed from an old kitchen cabinet. The court filing arrived later that week. My mother was officially served the summons for the property partition case. It included a copy of the expense breakdown, the forged deed information, and the full list of claims. She had 3 weeks to respond. My attorney said the case was now locked into the docket, meaning she couldn't stall it with personal excuses or informal delays. Greg still hadn't stepped foot inside since being locked out, but his presence never left. He started parking his truck across the street around 9 p.m. and staying there for hours. Lights off, engine idling. The first night I noticed it, I watched him sit there until almost midnight. The second night, he moved to the opposite corner and stared at the living room windows. After the third night, I called the non-emergency police line and reported suspicious loitering. They drove by and logged the incident. He pulled away when they showed up but returned the following night. On the fifth night, the mailbox got hit. I found it hanging off the wooden post in the morning, bent at a sharp angle. A neighbor across the street mentioned hearing a loud metal clang just before midnight. My sister found a wrench lying in the bushes nearby. It was covered in dirt, but still had a piece of blue duct tape wrapped around the handle, the same kind Greg used on his tool bins. I filed another report and included it with the growing case log. The next morning, my mother came downstairs and threw a stack of folded laundry onto the couch before walking out. She didn't say anything until I passed through the hallway. Then she told me I'd ruined everything, and that Greg had only been trying to help her feel human again. She blamed me for him leaving, for the lawsuit, for the house feeling cold and empty. I didn't argue. I just said I was only here to finish what I started and then remove myself completely. My sister started staying full-time at her boyfriend's apartment by that weekend. She packed a few things and left a note in the shared bathroom, saying she'd be back to check on things and grab clothes as needed, but the house felt unsafe. I didn't blame her. She stopped by every few days for a quick visit but didn't linger. I filed a utility separation request through the county portal. That included freezing all shared accounts and removing my name from any automatic withdrawals that weren't pre-approved. I also sent notice to the internet and water providers, along with a utility hold for disputed charges. My lawyer followed that up by delivering a detailed financial report to my mother. The spreadsheet covered 3 years of home expenses, misused joint funds, and damages caused by unauthorized projects. She had the option to repay or face recovery through legal enforcement. 2 days after that, I found a letter on my bed. It was handwritten in shaky cursive on floral stationery. She wrote that she wished I had never come home and that I had betrayed her worse than anyone ever had. The last line read, "As far as I'm concerned, you are no longer my son." I didn't respond. That night, while sorting through my old documents in storage, I found a file I hadn't seen in years. It was my father's original will, tucked behind some insurance papers and sealed in a thick envelope. It had been notarized when I was 17. The document clearly stated that I would inherit 50% of the house on my 30th birthday. something neither my mother nor I had ever acted on formally. The agreement I had signed when I was 19 gave me 40% ownership, but the will now opened the door to increasing that share once the date passed. My 30th birthday is 6 months away. I forwarded the scanned copy to my lawyer. She responded quickly. If verified and uncontested, the will could change the balance of ownership. It wouldn't void our current case, but it would give me legal grounds to push harder on the partition, or potentially gain control of more than just my existing share. The house had become a battlefield. One side wanted to bury history and rebuild something crooked on top. The other just wanted peace and closure. I wasn't staying a moment longer than necessary, but before I left, I was going to make sure every inch of this mess was sorted, on paper, in court, and permanently. A week before the court hearing, a letter arrived from my mother's attorney. It was hand-delivered and sealed in an envelope that looked more like a wedding invite than legal communication. Inside was a request for a private meeting. My lawyer reviewed the wording and said it was safe to attend, but warned me not to agree to anything until we'd had time to discuss it. The meeting was held in a rented office suite downtown, neutral ground. I showed up early with my attorney and waited. My mother arrived 10 minutes late, dressed like she was headed to a church luncheon. Greg came with her. He didn't speak at first, just stared. Their lawyer opened by saying my mother wanted a peaceful resolution and was willing to make a generous offer to keep the family intact. Then came the offer. A one-time buyout of $35,000. That amount wouldn't even cover a year's rent in a low-end apartment where we lived, let alone reflect the actual market value of my 40% stake. Before I could even speak, my attorney leaned forward and asked if that figure included any compensation for the unauthorized land sale, the concrete work, or the financial withdrawals. Their side said no. It was just to make this go away. Then came the slip. While discussing property usage, their lawyer referenced Greg's financial contributions to the home. That wasn't in any official paperwork. My attorney caught it immediately and asked to clarify what contributions meant. That's when we learned the plan. If I accepted the buyout, a new deed had already been drafted showing a transfer of 30% of the home to Greg. The draft wasn't filed yet, but it was sitting at the clerk's office under a pending transaction. My lawyer requested a copy that same day. It listed Greg as a cohabitant investor and showed a notarized transfer agreement between him and my mother dated 2 weeks prior. I shut down the meeting on the spot. I made it clear the only deal I'd consider was a full sale of the house with equal division of profit. No underhanded transfers, no piecemeal control swaps. Either we sell and move on, or we drag every last detail through court. My mother stood up mid-sentence. Her face was red, voice shaking. She accused me of tearing her life apart for no reason. Greg slammed his palm on the table and told me I'd regret making enemies out of family. I didn't flinch. My lawyer stood and told them the discussion was over. Things got louder in the lobby. Greg followed us out, still shouting. The receptionist looked alarmed. He kept pushing, demanding that I just let it go. Security was called. 2 guards showed up and walked him out of the building while my mother watched from the corner, silent. On court day, the hearing moved fast. My lawyer presented everything: the forged deed, the misuse of funds, the unauthorized construction, and the harassment. The judge reviewed each document, barely stopping to ask questions. After 20 minutes, he approved the motion to proceed with partition and issued an emergency injunction. No one could build, sell, or alter anything on the property until the legal process finished. My mother's attorney tried to counterclaim for emotional distress. The judge asked for evidence. There wasn't any. No medical documents, no records, not even a written statement beyond the original complaint. It was dismissed in under 2 minutes. Then, the judge addressed my mother directly. He told her that failure to comply with document requests would result in a default judgment. She sat stiffly, eyes locked forward. Greg, sitting behind her, glared at me the whole time. Back at the house, things changed. My mother stopped speaking entirely. She cooked meals, but only for herself. She moved her belongings into the guest room, leaving the master bedroom untouched. Greg didn't return for several days. When he did, he parked around the block and came in through the side gate. Late one night, I walked the backyard to check on the fencing. That's when I noticed it. Fresh trench lines about 2 feet deep near the far edge of the yard. The soil was still damp. I followed them to a corner behind the shed and saw a plastic conduit pipe sticking out of the ground. I traced it and found half-buried electrical wiring running toward the back fence. It wasn't part of the original house plans, and it definitely wasn't permitted. Someone had continued working on the illegal unit even after the court injunction. I took photos from every angle. I marked the coordinates on a digital map and sent everything to my attorney with a time-stamped report. She forwarded it to the county code enforcement team and the judge's office. The next morning, I filed an official violation notice. It included images, location data, and a summary of the injunction terms. There was no question anymore. Someone was trying to finish this project in secret before the court could stop it. And now, it's part of the record. The court-ordered appraisal happened the following Monday. A professional appraiser walked through the property with a clipboard, tape measure, and camera. He took detailed notes, measured every room, checked the foundation, and even noted the unauthorized slab in the backyard. The final report valued the house at nearly 40% more than my mother had claimed in her buyout offer. That alone confirmed what we already knew. Her generous offer wasn't even close to fair. At the next hearing, the judge reviewed the report and issued a final ruling. The house would be sold, and the proceeds would be split according to the original deed, 60% for my mother, 40% for me. The judge also acknowledged my father's will, stating that the percentages aligned with both legal history and testamentary intent. My mother tried to stall again, this time citing stress and emotional overwhelm. But the judge warned that refusal to cooperate could result in contempt charges and further penalties. 2 days later, she signed the listing paperwork. The realtor came by to take professional photos. Greg didn't say anything when he saw the sign go up in the yard. He spent the next week quietly packing up his tools, loading them into his truck, and hauling boxes out through the side door. No arguments, no outbursts, just silence. Once the listing went live, I made the decision to leave the house entirely. I booked a hotel near my attorney's office and left the keys with the realtor. I didn't tell my mother I was leaving. I didn't need to. That house wasn't a home anymore, not to me. 5 days later, a cash buyer submitted an offer. Clean, no contingencies, full asking price. I accepted it the same day. My mother held off signing for 3 more days. Her attorney told mine that she was weighing her options. But after a final court reminder and pressure from the escrow company, she signed. The funds were split through escrow without direct contact. I got my 40%, a sizable amount, and placed it into a trust account the same day. No joint names, no shared responsibility, just clean lines, clear ownership, and nothing left to dispute. I had my attorney send certified letters to both my mother and Greg. The message was simple. I would no longer engage in any personal or legal discussions with them outside formal channels. No more calls, no texts, no unexpected visits. All communication from now on would go through professionals. My sister gave me one last update after stopping by the area to grab the last of her things. An old neighbor mentioned seeing Greg hauling furniture into a moving truck over the weekend. Through a friend of a friend, she later heard my mother was no longer living at the house. She didn't know where they went. She didn't ask. My attorney closed the fraud report after the title transfer and sale were completed. I signed off on the decision. It wasn't because I forgave what happened. It was because I had everything I needed. Ownership resolved, financial damage recovered, nothing left that required dragging anyone through more paperwork. I did write one last letter. It wasn't emotional or dramatic. It wasn't an invitation to reconcile. It was formal. I gave it to my mother's attorney to deliver. In it, I confirmed that the house was sold, that legal matters were closed, and that she no longer had access to any part of my life. I asked that she never involve me again in housing, financial, or inheritance decisions. No more surprises, no more borrowed space. That chapter was closed. I used part of the money from the sale to buy a small house near my current base. It wasn't big, just 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, but it was mine. I furnished it from scratch. I set up a room that reminded me of the one I used to have growing up, not as a copy, but as a replacement. A sturdy bed, a bookshelf, a new display case for my medals. Clean walls, quiet space. I met with a legal advisor and updated my own estate plan. I wrote down where everything would go, what could and couldn't be done with my property, and who would be contacted in the event something happened. No room for interpretation. No one could gift my future to someone else, not anymore. What stayed with me wasn't the anger or the court drama. It was the clarity. The room had never really been the problem. It was about being treated like I belonged, like I wasn't an afterthought, like I had the right to return without finding my place erased every time. I asked for one thing, a boundary, and even that was too much for her to respect. Now I don't have to ask anymore.